The Drokari were a small, mouse-like alien species native to Eldora, a once lush and thriving world. Their planet, however, had recently been torn apart by a relentless series of natural disasters. Earthquakes had shattered their cities, volcanic eruptions had spewed ash into the sky, and the very air had grown toxic. Eldora's ecosystem was collapsing, transforming a vibrant landscape into a nightmarish wasteland. The Drokari, desperate to survive, were forced to take shelter in crumbling underground hideouts, their numbers dwindling with each passing day. Their tiny voices were being lost amid the chaos, and the hope of survival was fading. The Galactic Council, a powerful assembly of advanced species governing the galaxy, had declared Eldora a lost cause. The decision had come swiftly and coldly. Eldora had no strategic value, no rare resources worth saving, and no significance to the broader galactic economy. To them, the Drokari were expendable. In an organized evacuation, they prioritized the removal of only valuable beings, corporate employees, researchers, and those deemed important to the intergalactic community. The Drokari, a species with little influence or power, were not considered worth the effort. They were left behind to fend for themselves, forgotten and abandoned. Their calls for aid had been dismissed, and the Council moved on, looking elsewhere for worlds that mattered. In the midst of this indifference, there was one group that refused to accept the Council's decision: humans. Humanity had only recently made its way into the galactic scene. Still considered a young, unproven race by many, they had yet to earn their place among the more advanced civilizations. Among the humans was Dr. Maria Lawson, a passionate scientist who believed that every life had value. When Maria heard about the Drokari's plight, she couldn't remain silent. It wasn't in her nature to watch innocent beings suffer and do nothing. She saw the Drokari as victims of a bureaucratic system that valued convenience over compassion. Maria decided to take action, even if it meant defying the Council. She gathered a group of like-minded individuals, volunteers who shared her values and her outrage at the situation. There was Alex, an engineer known for his creativity with limited resources, and Tara, a medic determined to bring whatever comfort she could to those in need. They were not the most well-equipped team, but what they lacked in resources, they made up for in determination. The mission was risky, not just because of the harsh conditions on Eldora, but because defying the Galactic Council could have serious consequences. Still, Maria and her team felt they had no choice. They couldn't just sit back and watch an entire species be left to die. As they loaded their small ship with experimental terraforming equipment, medical supplies, and whatever they could scrounge together, Maria addressed her team. She spoke of the Drokari's suffering, of the injustice of the Council's decision, and of their responsibility, as humans, to help those in need, no matter the risk. The crew listened, united by a shared purpose. They knew they might not return, that their actions could lead to repercussions from the Council, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that there were lives on Eldora that could still be saved. With determination in their eyes, Maria and her team took off, leaving behind the safety of regulations to embrace the unknown. Eldora was waiting for them, and they were determined to give the Drokari a fighting chance. Defying the Galactic Council wasn't something Maria and her team took lightly. They knew the consequences. They were risking their freedom, and perhaps even their lives. The Council had made it clear that any unauthorized intervention would be met with severe punishment. Yet the thought of abandoning the Drokari weighed far heavier on their hearts. The team faced other challenges as well. Their resources were limited. They were a small crew with a modest ship, far from the well-funded, powerful fleets of the Council. Skepticism from fellow humans was another barrier. Many considered their mission foolish, a waste of effort and a direct challenge to a much stronger force. Still, Maria, Alex, Tara, and the rest pressed on, gathering whatever they could: experimental terraforming equipment, medical supplies, and food. They loaded up the small, worn-out spaceship that would be their lifeline. Alex worked tirelessly, modifying the ship to handle the harsh environment of Eldora. He was used to making do with less, turning scraps into something functional. Tara, the medic, organized their medical supplies, knowing they would need every bit of it to help the Drokari. The crew wasn't large, but each member was fully committed to the mission, driven by Maria's conviction. They knew the odds were against them, but there was a collective resolve to see this through. The journey to Eldora was tense. The ship, though sturdy, was small, and each member of the crew carried the weight of what they were about to face. They tried to keep their spirits up, but there was an unspoken fear, the unknown of Eldora, the threat of council intervention, and the uncertainty of whether they would succeed. As they flew through the dark reaches of space, Maria gathered everyone in the ship's cramped common area. She knew the weight of fear that hung over them and decided to confront it head-on. She reminded them why they were doing this, not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. They had the power to make a difference, even if it was only for a small, forgotten species. The crew listened, and as Maria spoke, they felt the fear transform into determination. There were moments of camaraderie, shared jokes to lighten the mood, stories about why each of them had joined the mission, and small gestures of support. In the face of uncertainty, they found strength in each other. As they approached Eldora, the view from the ship's windows was sobering. The planet was covered in swirling storms, dark clouds casting shadows over the land below. Lightning flickered in the distance, and the surface looked scarred and broken. The descent was rough. Turbulence rocked the ship as they fought through the storm to find a safe landing spot. The crew worked together, Alex at the controls, Tara monitoring the ship's systems, and Maria directing from the cockpit. They landed on a stretch of relatively stable ground, but the scene that greeted them was grim. The devastation was worse than they had imagined. The ground was cracked and barren, ash covering everything like a suffocating blanket. The air was thick, the result of volcanic eruptions that had poisoned the atmosphere. In the distance, they could see the remains of Drokari settlements, buildings that had crumbled into rubble, fields that had turned to dust. It was clear that survival here was a daily struggle. The Drokari they encountered were in dire shape. They were living in makeshift shelters, hastily constructed from whatever materials they could find. Their eyes, once bright with curiosity, now looked hollow, filled with exhaustion and resignation. When the humans approached, the Drokari were wary. They had seen outsiders before, but only those who came to take what they wanted and leave. The Drokari had been abandoned too many times, and trust was a fragile thing. Maria stepped forward, her posture open and non-threatening. She introduced herself and her team, explaining that they were here to help, not to take. She spoke of the mission, of the technology they had brought, and of their determination to make Eldora livable again. The Drokari listened, but their expressions were skeptical. They had heard promises before, and none of them had been kept. It was only when Tara approached a group of children, offering them clean water and a gentle smile, that something began to shift. The Drokari elders watched as the humans set up their equipment, as they began to work despite the harsh conditions, and slowly, hope, a fragile, flickering thing, began to take root. The humans were different, but whether they could be trusted was something that would take time to learn. The humans began setting up their base camp in the heart of the Drokari settlement. It wasn't easy. The conditions were brutal. Acid rain fell intermittently, forcing them to wear protective gear whenever they ventured outside. The terrain was treacherous, with unstable ground and sharp rocks threatening every step. Their equipment, already old and barely functioning, faced constant issues in the harsh environment. Alex, the engineer, took on the role of fixing whatever broke, often having to improvise with whatever limited materials he could find. He transformed damaged circuits into working devices, rigged makeshift shelters to protect against the acid rain, and found creative solutions for problems that seemed insurmountable. It was slow, painstaking work, but they pushed forward, knowing the Drokari depended on them. Building trust with the Drokari was an even greater challenge. The elders were cautious, their skepticism evident as they watched Maria and her team. They had been let down before, and words alone weren't enough to convince them. Maria approached the elders each day, explaining their plans and asking for their help. She didn't hide the risks or sugarcoat their chances, but spoke with sincerity. Slowly, her honesty began to make an impression. Meanwhile, Tara, the medic, focused her efforts on helping the sick. Many Drokari children were suffering from respiratory issues caused by the toxic atmosphere, and Tara set up a makeshift clinic. She treated them with gentle hands, showing kindness that the Drokari hadn't experienced in a long time. The children began to smile again, their parents watching with a mix of hope and hesitation. A young Drokari named Velo stepped forward, offering to help the humans communicate with the others. He was curious, fascinated by these outsiders who seemed so determined to help despite the risks. Velo became their bridge, helping them understand the cultural nuances of the Drokari, what foods they could eat, the customs they observed, and the stories that had kept their spirits alive. Velo's involvement made a difference. The Drokari began to see the humans as more than strangers. There were still walls to break down, but the first cracks were beginning to show. The first major success came when the humans managed to purify a small water source. It had taken days of trial and error, the experimental terraforming tech pushing its limits in the harsh environment. Maria, Alex, and Velo worked together, adjusting and readjusting until finally, the water that flowed was clean and drinkable. The moment was transformative. The Drokari gathered around, hesitant at first, then filled with cautious joy as they tasted the fresh water. It was the first tangible sign that the humans could truly help them. The mood in the camp began to shift. The Drokari, who had once looked at the humans with suspicion, now watched them with curiosity and a glimmer of hope. They started to offer assistance, helping with the camp, showing the humans where to find materials, and even sharing stories around a small fire at night. It was still a long road ahead, and the challenges were far from over, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope. The humans and Drokari had made progress, and though it was small, it was real. It was enough to keep them going. The Galactic Council, always vigilant in maintaining control over the galaxy, became aware of the unauthorized mission to Eldora. Reports had surfaced of human activity on the supposedly abandoned planet, and this act of defiance did not go unnoticed. To the Council, this was more than a humanitarian effort. It was a challenge to their authority, one that could not be ignored. They saw humanity's actions as reckless and potentially destabilizing. The Council decided to act swiftly to reassert their dominance. They dispatched an envoy to Eldora, with clear instructions to put an end to the humans' efforts and force them to leave. The envoy, Vakos, was a high-ranking official known for his loyalty to the Council and his unyielding nature. His arrival on Eldora was marked by a cold efficiency, his ship descending through the toxic clouds to land near the human base. Vakos wasted no time, seeking out Maria and her team. His demeanor was formal, but his words carried an underlying threat. He demanded that the humans cease their activities immediately. The Council's decision had been clear. Eldora was to be left alone, its fate sealed, and any interference was a violation of their directive. Vakos reminded Maria of the consequences of defying the Council's orders, his tone sharp and unforgiving. Maria stood her ground, refusing to comply. She spoke with conviction, challenging the idea that bureaucratic decisions should dictate who lived and who died. She argued that the Drokari were living beings deserving of every chance to survive, that the Council's indifference was a failure of morality. Vakos, unmoved by her arguments, made his position clear: there would be no exceptions. He gave the humans an ultimatum: they had 48 hours to pack up and leave, or face severe consequences. The threat hung heavy in the air, and Vakos left, confident that his words would be enough to break their resolve. In the aftermath of Vakos's visit, the human crew was divided. The fear of what the Council might do weighed heavily on them. Some wanted to leave, worried about the repercussions that could come not only for them but for their families back home. Others, inspired by Maria's determination, were willing to risk it all to stay. The tension among the crew was palpable. The Drokari, overhearing the heated discussions, felt a sense of abandonment creeping back in. They had begun to believe in the humans, to hope again, and now it seemed that hope might be taken from them once more. Maria found herself struggling with doubt. She had led her team here, convinced that they could make a difference, but now their lives, and the lives of the Drokari, were hanging in the balance. She took a moment alone, looking out at the devastated landscape and the small signs of progress they had made. It would be easy to leave, to avoid the consequences and protect her team. But then she thought of the Drokari, of Velo's earnest hope, of the children Terra had treated, of the elders who had begun to trust them. Their resilience, their will to survive, gave her strength. Maria knew that they couldn't abandon the Drokari, not when they had come this far. She made her decision, her resolve stronger than ever. They would stay, no matter the cost. Maria knew the only way forward was to stand their ground. She gathered the crew and spoke with conviction, sharing her unwavering belief that they had a duty to help the Drokari, regardless of the risks. She reminded them that they had come here to make a difference, and they couldn't walk away now. The crew listened, and one by one they found the strength to stand with her. Velo, inspired by Maria's determination, rallied the Drokari. They had seen themselves as powerless for so long, but now, with the humans by their side, they began to see that they could fight for their survival. Together, the humans and Drokari accelerated the terraforming efforts. They worked day and night, purifying water, enriching the soil, and constructing barriers against the acid rain. Alex pushed the equipment to its limits, making repairs on the fly, while Terra continued treating the sick, her hands never idle. The Drokari, once hesitant, now worked alongside the humans, using their knowledge of the land to help guide the terraforming process. They scouted for usable materials, helped build makeshift defenses, and took pride in each small victory. For the first time, the Drokari felt like they were taking control of their own fate, and it made all the difference. The news of what was happening on Eldora began to spread. Rumors of the humans' defiance reached distant corners of the galaxy, and it caught the attention of a few sympathetic alien species. They saw the determination of humanity, and were moved by their willingness to risk everything for a small, overlooked species like the Drokari. Some of these species decided to act, defying the Council's orders. A small convoy arrived on Eldora, carrying additional supplies, food, and medical equipment. They brought tools to help with the terraforming process and offered their skills and expertise. It wasn't a large force, but it was enough to bolster the humans' efforts. The sight of these new allies lifted everyone's spirits, humans, Drokari, and the crew alike. Varkos, who had been monitoring the situation, watched in silence as the humans, the Drokari, and their new allies continued to work. He had expected fear to break the humans' resolve, but instead, he found them standing firm, bolstered by the support of others. He saw the unity that had formed, the determination in their eyes, and the hope in the Drokari's faces. Varkos could have called for reinforcements, could have enforced the Council's order with force, but something in the scene gave him pause. He hesitated, realizing that the Council's stance might be more fragile than he had imagined. Instead of taking drastic action, Varkos chose to report back without escalation. Maria, knowing the Council was still watching, decided to send a message of her own. She recorded a transmission directed to the Council, her words calm yet filled with determination. She spoke of the Drokari's resilience, of humanity's belief that every life mattered, and of the allies who had come to support them. She made it clear that humanity would not stand by while innocent beings suffered, regardless of politics or authority. Her message wasn't just for the Council, it was for the galaxy, a statement of what humanity stood for. The efforts on Eldora finally began to bear fruit. The terraforming equipment, pushed to its limits, succeeded in stabilizing a portion of the planet. The once toxic air was slowly beginning to clear, the soil turning fertile enough to plant the first seeds. The Drokari worked alongside the humans, planting crops, building stronger shelters, and laying the foundation for a new beginning. It wasn't the end of their struggles, but it was a start, a real chance for the Drokari to rebuild. In the end, the humans and Drokari stood side by side, a bond formed through shared struggle and mutual respect. They had faced impossible odds, but together, they had carved out hope from the devastation. As they looked across the transformed landscape, a small sprout of green emerged from the freshly healed soil, a fragile, but unmistakable symbol of life, hope, and resilience. It was a reminder that, Even in the darkest times, the determination to do what was right could lead to something beautiful.